Hi, I'm Jeff Scheetz. Welcome to Street Theory for Guitarists. Theory is a huge subject with a ton of concepts and applications. But how do you know which ones will have the most immediate impact on your playing? Street Theory for Guitarists solves that problem. You'll learn the formula for constructing chords so you can play them anywhere on the neck. I'll show you the formula and all 7 patterns of the major scale, and all 5 patterns for the minor pentatonic, major pentatonic, and blues scales. I'll show you 3 different methods to unlock the improvisational power of the modes. The cage system is a great way to organize harmonic content on the fretboard. The course is packed with on-screen diagrams and animations. You'll get a massive manual with charts and neck diagrams, and all of the key examples are tabbed and notated. Plus, you'll get all the jam tracks to work with on your own. So grab your guitar, let's dig in. Hey everyone, welcome to our live event here, coming from TrueFire. We've got Nathan here from TrueFire. Hey Nathan.
Hey Jeff, how's it going?
It's going great, man. We are fired up and excited to do some theory. Oh no, everybody runs for the exit. No, it won't be that. It won't be like that. It's going to be better than that. So
It's going to be a great night. I'm so excited to have you here, Jeff. This is going to be amazing. And people have been asking for more office hours, so here we are.
Absolutely. So kind of the way we're putting this office hours together is we're going to focus on one of my courses, and this course is street theory. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. If you've got questions, you can post them in the chat. We're going to try not to go down too many crazy rabbit holes in the theory world, because this is street theory. And in my mind, street theory is like practical stuff, right? Because sometimes people think about theory and you think, oh my gosh, you're thinking a college course and chordal harmony and semi-quavers. It's not really the way I look at theory. If you play a G chord and a C chord, you're playing theory, right? Those 2 chords go together. The C is the 4th of the key of G. So if we're thinking about it that way, anything you play in guitar can be sort of unpacked, traced back to being some kind of a theory concept. So that's kind of what we're going to look at tonight. I'm going to go over a couple of things that I think are super important. We might roll a video from the course. Going to answer some questions. Anything that I'm talking about, if you've got questions sort of related to these things, let's start there. But I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I think are really important when you're really getting ready to jump into theory. I would normally do this and say, raise your hand if you haven't done a lot of theory, right? Even if you have done some, once again, sometimes people just don't know how to think about theory, and it seems like a lot going on, right? Music theory seems like there's too much happening, and it's like, why do I need to know that? I just want to play some Hendrix, right? But even if you break down every Jimi Hendrix song, whether he knew what he was doing or not, he was utilizing music theory, playing, an E pentatonic over an E blues. That can be traced back to basically why that is if we look at it via theory, right? So what's the most important thing to sort of have the cornerstone, the foundation of getting going with theory? Well, in my opinion, it is understanding what's going on your neck in a real basic way. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. We think about that as fretboard visualization, being able to look down and either see notes or shapes, but basically see what's going on the neck, right? For a lot of players that I run into and a lot of students I've had, this is like a foreign land, right? They don't know what's happening there. That'd be the equivalent of like, not understanding basic words, but trying to learn punctuation, right? Here's what a comma does. Well, if you don't know the basic words, it doesn't help you. So what we want to do is understand what's going on in our neck. There's the one thing that I will say is everybody thinks, okay, well, I'll just learn that. Here's the tricky part. There is no just one way to understand what's happening on the neck, right? So we're going to look at a bunch of different ways. We don't have time to go in depth to this, but I'm going to give you sort of the ammunition for you to then say, all right, I'm going to tackle this, or I'm going to do this. So we can look at the neck in a lot of different ways. It's based on patterns. All of our theory can be based on patterns. So I will say this, if you take a look at all the strings, one thing we can do is we can know all of the notes on the neck, right? We can know that's an F note, and that's a C note, and that's a G note, that's a B flat note. And we can learn every single note on the neck. So when you look down, you don't see just random things, you see all these notes. Now, number one, that's hard. Number two, it's not real fun. And that kind of comes the more we learn. So rather than think about doing it that way, I would say look at learning notes on two strings, on the sixth string and the fifth string. This is super important because we're going to base chords off of those notes, and we're going to base scales off of those notes. So learning your notes on this sixth string, E, right? If we're going to go here and we're going to go E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and off of the A string, A sharp, B, C. That doesn't take a lot to memorize those, but knowing that will totally basically help you down the road. So if I look at my dots, right? G, A, and B, then I can find any other notes around there. So just memorize some spots, but get those memorized because that will really help you. You don't have to know every single note all over the neck to start with, but learn those. All right. And yes, throw down. I'm glad you guys need to understand the fretboard better. Is this a course that one could purchase? Absolutely. I believe we're going to have a code where you can get this course for a discount here later on sometime. Nathan will probably, look at him, he's on the ball, he's throwing that up. He'll post a link to it in the chat as well, so we'll be able to see basically how to get this course. But yeah, it's a pretty extensive course, goes into a lot of things. We certainly don't have time to go through here. But so learn your notes on the low two strings. That leads us to the next thing that will help you with theory. Know your octaves, right? An octave of a note means if this is F, right? If I play this F, this is F, this is F. So if I learn those notes, what I want to do is basically learn those shapes all over the place. Learn your octave shape. If I do that, I can find those notes and those octaves all over. If I want to play an F note, I play F, 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 F. Right? And that was all the F notes there are, right? So if I want to play a D note, okay, well, that's D, that's D, that's D, that's, I see the neck now like that. So when I look down, if I'm looking at one note, like this note, I don't just see that note, I see the octaves around it. So it's almost like I see this spider web of notes going up the neck whenever I see one note. So that really helps you sort of start to map this out in your head, right? So knowing the notes on your two low strings and your octaves can help you find any note on the neck without memorizing every string. So that's a good step. Now, a lot of times you'll hear players talk about the caged system, right? Oh, you got to know the caged system. So what is the cage? We're not going to go into deep here. I'm just giving you some ideas of here's different ways to look at the neck. But the caged system is basically C-A-G-E-D. It's based on our open chords, right? Our C, our A, our G, our E, our D, and we move those up the neck. So if I play my C chord, then I play my C chord as an A shape, the A of caged. Then I play my C chord as a G shape, then as an E shape, then as a D shape, back to the C shape. What I've effectively done is played all of my C chords up the neck, and I've connected them, because a big thing is connecting things, right? All of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight, everything is connected. So we want to look at that. Caged is a great way to do that. If I know my caged system, I can then also put scales with each of those chords. With this chord, I can play this scale. I can play this. So those chords and scales go together, right? And just doing nothing like that still sounds pretty cool because it's always connected. One thing's connected to the next, right? So here's the thing about cage. There's a lot of depth to cage, connecting arpeggios and scales and modes and doing the minor caged and sevenths and all these different things. A lot of great resources out there to figure that out. But the other thing I'll say is caged isn't like the only way to look at the neck. It's one way. You don't even need to learn all of these ways that I'm going to show you or talk about tonight. But you can learn as many of them as you want. And some people play caged. They love looking at the neck from the caged point of view, and it's the way they think about it. Other guys don't look at it that way at all. A lot of players who play by ear, maybe they don't even know that they're playing caged, right? We worked with a great blues legend, and he came in and said, yeah, I like to play, when I play this chord, I'll play. And then when I go up and play this chord, I'll do something like that. And I'm like, well, that's the cage system. And so from his standpoint, he'd never even heard of the cage system, but that's exactly how he played, right? So that's something that I think is super important to think about. It's like, these are just ways to look at it. If you've got a great ear and you don't need any help doing it, you're dismissed. You can go, right? You're good to go. But for the rest of us, we're going to figure out all of the different ways we could possibly learn the neck, and the cage system is a great way. Some guys like to think of looking down at the neck. They see all the pentatonic patterns, right? So they see all the pentatonic scale shapes going up the neck, and they connect it that way. Other people may look at the modal shapes all the way up, right? So you got all the different patterns. As I look up the neck, I see all those, right? When I look down, I see all those patterns, how they fit together. And if we're thinking about modal scales, then we're thinking about our major scale going, which leads us to playing diatonic harmonized scales, or what we call the chord scales, right? Going, or we can do it like this. But that's just another way to see those patterns on the neck, right? So modal playing, diatonic harmonized chords. We can play arpeggio shapes. We can do those diatonically. I can play these arpeggio patterns, and I can see every one, right? I can play those shapes. I can play this shape of arpeggio. There's a million different shapes of arpeggios. The point is, I'm just using that as a reference to look down and see all of these things on the neck. All right. So the other way to look at it is through a simple triad. So triads are 3-note chords, right? So if I looked at it from G major triad, a lot of you probably know this shape. Then I can do the inversions of that going up. Or I could do these inversions. Instead of going up, I could do them across here, right? There's just different ways to look at it. So once again, not enough hours in a day to go through every one of these shapes. I cover a lot of this stuff in street theory, and you can learn a lot of these shapes in different places. The point I want to impress upon you tonight is learn your neck, visualize your fretboard, learn 2 of these different ways to do it, learn 3 of them, but always be thinking these are all connected, right? Everything is connected. When I play this chord, right, it's connected to this pentatonic shape. It's connected to this arpeggio. It's connected to this major scale. It's got this triad in it. So these triad shapes, octaves are there, right? All of that stuff is connected. Everything I just talked about is connected. So try to avoid the trap of learning one separate thing on guitar and not connecting it to everything else, right? That's sort of a waste of time to me. It's like, I think it's so much more valuable to learn something and go, okay, where did that come from? What scale did that come from? What chord did that come from? What key am I in? Reverse engineer everything you learn and find out what basically where it came from, right? That is the big takeaway from tonight for everyone. I think if you can do that, man, you'll be well on your path. But being able to look down, and like when I look down at the neck, I see all of those different things I just talked about. So then when I'm going to start talking about theory concepts, or playing the notes of a chord, or following the arpeggios out of a 2-5-1, I can just see it. I don't even have to play it. I just know where those shapes are because I know the patterns and all those different ways to look at the neck. If you don't know all those different ways, no problem. just learn one way. Learn the cage system. Learn to play your diatonic, chords going up the neck, your bar chords. It's not important that you know all of them to start with, but it's important that you start thinking about it that way and connecting everything together. All right. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. And absolutely, I see a lot of questions rolling in and a lot of comments. Octaves are super useful. Yes, they are absolutely so crucial to being able to find your way around the neck and see things as you're playing, right? If I'm going to play something, I want to know what that note was. Well, if I play this note, I know the octave is here. So that's a half a step down. So if I'm playing a blues, I know this note is here. That's that guy, right? That's sixth. So anyway, not going down a rabbit hole there, but being able to know those octaves and just see where your notes are, it really opens things up. And you can do it even if you're just starting out. You can do it by learning the notes on your fifth and sixth string, learn how to base chords off of there, and then start looking at things a little bit more like what we're going to do in this next section, which is think about intervals, right? So if you got any questions about this stuff, once again, this isn't about learning all of the diatonic harmonized scale, but if you've got a question about that or how to go about it, feel free to post that. We'll get to some questions after a bit here. What all this learning will help us with, it will lead us to this next thing, which is understanding and looking at the neck and looking at interval shapes, right? So if we think about interval shapes, intervals are just the distance between two notes. So there's a couple ways we can measure that on guitar, right? One is by distance of a half step, which is 1 fret, or a whole step, which is 2 frets. So a step and a half would be 1.5, right? 2 whole steps would be, right? So from there to there's 2 whole steps. From there to there's 2.5. So we can do it that way. But the other way we want to do it is the way that we're going to use and filter into a lot of things we do. Chords, scales, understanding vocal harmonies, everything is going to be based on looking at our major scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? We can play it there. We can play a major scale all over the, etc. You get the idea, right? But if we play it here, now in this case, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, we don't really care what those notes are. Why? Because if I move it down a half a step, they all change. Or if I move it up here, they're all different. What's more important is to think of those, basically those notes as numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 1, which is the octave, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is where we start thinking about how to measure the distance between notes. So from there to there, that's 1, 2. So that's the interval of a 2 or a second, right? That's that interval. From there to there's a third. We looked at that and said, well, that's 2 whole steps, which it is, but it's also the interval of a third. So when you start thinking about measuring distance like that, that's when you start being able to look down and see all of these different shapes and be able to change things, right? If you understand chords, we're going to talk about building chords tonight. We're going to talk about understanding intervals and how to build chords. Those are really 2 things I'm going to show you, and then we can, jump into some questions and all kinds of different things. So I'm going to play a video here in a minute from the course, just because it will give you a good idea. The first video that played was a little funky for me. So let's see if this works. If this is clear.
Now that you have a good grasp on intervals and understand how they work within the major scale, I want to show you one other really important thing that intervals are going to do for your guitar playing. And that is to help you identify all the notes around the root note that you're looking at. This is important for when you play chords and certainly when you play other scales as well. So let's take a look at our G note right here. Now we know we built our intervals based off of our G major scale. And we remember when we learned the G major scale, that's our 3 notes per string scale, but we also have the traditional scale shape down here, right? So that's going to come into play as we start looking at how intervals relate back to this note. So if this is our root note and we're in the key of G major, here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn to visualize where the intervals are without counting up every time. So for example, from there to there, that's what? A fifth, right? Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that shape is a fifth. Now we know that also because if we've ever played a power chord, right? We've seen it written out as G5. Now you know what that means. That means you're playing your G and the interval of a fifth. So G5 is just that, which means if I want to play a B5, I'd go up to B and my fifth is right there. It's the same shape, right? The same pattern. So what we want to do is learn to think about other intervals in that same way. For example, another common interval we're going to want to memorize is the interval of a third. Now we know our major third is there. It's a little bit harder to see there, you know, or to play, I should say there, because it's on the same string. So what if we took this note and we put it on the next string? So that's my B, right? And that's also would be the third of my traditional G major scale, 2, 3. So from there to there is the interval of a major third. Always, that's the interval from a major third. If this is my root note, then my major third is right here. So it's that shape. The same kind of idea as the shape of the 5 chord can be used to find your major third when this is your root. So if this is my 1, this is my 3. So here's a cool thing. If that's the third, where's the minor third? Well, we know it's always going to be just down a half a step. So that's, you can hear that, right? That sounds major and happy, minor and sad, real dark. So that's the interval shape of a minor third. Now, why do we want to know that? Say we're playing in D as our major key, and that's my root. Where's the minor third? It's right there. So we'll need this when we start building chords and starting understanding how to put chords together and add different notes to chords. So learning these patterns is really important. Now in the chart, I've got all of the notes mapped out that are easy to see, the ones that you really should know. But if we think about it, we know there's a third. Well, that's a third. That's a minor third. If that's my third, that means that's my fourth. That would be a sharp 4. That'd be my 5, my flat 6 or my minor 6, my 6. So you see how you start to identify those notes, and those will always be the same in any key. So it's a good idea to practice on memorizing some of these shapes so you get them under your fingers, because when we start to put together chords, we're going to be doing things like, let's add the major 7th note. Well, you need to be able to look down and see where that's at. Now this is just basically basing this interval memorization off of our 6th string. We could do it off of the 5th string. You know, on guitar, we're going to have major scale shapes all over the neck. So we could do it in a lot of different places. Don't worry about that right now. It's more important to get it down in one spot and understand how it works in that one place than it is to try to worry about memorizing every major scale and interval combination all over the neck. So we're just going to look at it right here and concentrate on the simple shapes. Our 5th, our major third, our minor third. And then we'll go from there, once again, to a 4th, to a minor 7, to a 7, to the octave. We can go beyond that, right? So what happens when we go past our octave? That's what we call a compound interval. A compound interval is simply when we go past the octave to this note. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that basically from there to there is the interval of a 9th, which is a compound interval. But it's really important to identify some of those, because if we're playing a chord and we want to make it a 9th, we may want to add that note. So being able to just look down and see that shape instead of have to think, okay, what is the 9th? If we're in G, that would make it an A. You know, it gets really confusing. So basically, if you learn how to visualize your fretboard this way and identify these intervals, it will really help you put together lots of cool musical applications here. Now, the other thing about intervals, an interval can be melodic or it can be harmonic. So a melodic interval is when I play one note and then I play the next note. So that's the interval of a fifth, right? One note, then the next note. A harmonic interval is when I basically create harmony and play those together. Right? So when I play those together, that's when I get things like chords. So like power chord stuff is usually. But if I played that as melodic intervals, it would be. Right? So intervals can be used in a lot of really interesting ways, and different intervals sound different. So if I play this really common blues thing, right, which is basically the interval of a sixth. So I'm playing this note up a sixth. That's a harmonic interval because I'm keeping those together. If I played it one note at a time, it would be a melodic interval of a sixth. If I play thirds, harmonically would be. So melodic intervals are when you play your notes one at a time, and harmonic intervals are when you play them together.
All right, so good stuff. Good stuff, guys. I know there's been a couple questions, so I'm going to jump into those before I sort of continue with this. That's just one of the lessons from the street theory course. Mopar's saying, what's the fastest method to learn to get me going? Well, that's a fair question, right? I will say it depends upon what you want to play. But if you're just talking about getting started playing in general, man, at TrueFire, we have 2 courses that I did. Not just saying that because I did them, that they're really good, but they're super helpful. Our beginner course is Learn Guitar 1, and that's actually free to anyone. So you go there and download that for free. That gets it gets you going pretty quick. Then Learn Guitar 2 sort of takes you sort of the next step. It gets you playing some basic chords. It gets you doing some things. So it's probably, to me, the best just beginner resource. Now, if you said, hey, I want to play blues, or I want to play rock, or I want to play something else, honestly, at TrueFire, we have some pretty good learning paths to sort of start from the ground and build up on any of those styles. And of course, honestly, I think always the best option is to get yourself hooked up with an instructor who can supplement what you're learning online and gives you the stuff the tools to go from there, right? So that would be a good way to get started. This stuff here for sure is not beginner. This isn't a beginner lesson when we start talking about understanding your neck. But I will say the stuff that I just sort of went over with the intervals is not difficult. And if you know a scale, this is really good stuff to know. This is like the foundation, right? So I always talk about this, and it's like some guys just play by ear and they don't ever really learn much of theory, and they do well, and they can play great and wonderful. But to me, it's always like, why wouldn't you want to learn as much as you can about the instrument, right? Like I always equate it to communication, verbal communication, right? Because we're trying to express ourselves through guitar, much like we do when we're talking. So if you only know a couple words, right? If I knew a couple words and some gestures, I could probably get you to come across the room and look at these new pedals I've got, right? And I could go, hey, you, come. That would probably get the job done, right? But if I know more words, if I know proper grammar, if I have a little bit more going on, I could say, excuse me, would you please walk across the room and check out these new boutique pedals I have? I think you'll really like the delay pedal, right? So totally, why is that not, why are we thinking we shouldn't be able to do that, right? Why wouldn't we say, hey, let's do the most elaborate version, the best version, right? That's what we want to do. So I think that's something that we are definitely wanting to do. So someone says this is, I'm playing lefty. Is that correct? Man, I haven't played lefty for a while. Do you see me left-handed, everybody? Because if it is, I'll fix that. I only see it right-handed. Chime in. Make sure it's not just Don that sees that. Don just could be looking at it backwards. All right, we're going to fix that. Boom.
There
How's
we
that grab
go.
you? Better?
There
I'm
it is.
definitely a
Perfect, Jeff.
right-handed player.
There we go. That looks great.
There we go. It's good to know. Good to know. All right. So not that any of the stuff that we've played so far really matters, whether you're right or left-handed. You can play the same theory either way, right or left-handed. So we're talking about, so Davey bought the course, very practical, usable theory. Dude, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Very much appreciated. So the idea of understanding your intervals, right? And why this is important is because so much stuff comes from here. Building chords is going to come from here. We've got another video we can play about building chords. I might just talk about it instead. We take our major scale and building chords, we go take the first note, third note, and fifth note. Guess what? That gives me a major chord. So if I just said play the first, third, and fifth, if you don't understand intervals, you're not going to really understand that. If you understand intervals, then it's very easy to see how that makes sense, because that's my first note, my third note, my fifth note, and there's my major chord. That's pretty easy. So that's a triad. But when we get into things like playing a ninth chord or playing some strange thing like a dominant 7 flat 5, then we have to look down and go, ooh, we got to know where that flat 5 is. Flat the 5, right? So if I can just look at that and see it visually, it helps so much with everything. You actually don't need to be able to memorize, or you don't need to memorize 1,000 chord shapes at that point if you understand the theory of how to build chords, and then you understand your intervals, right? Same thing with scales, right? If someone said to you, oh, a Dorian is just a major scale, but it's got, a flat third and a flat 7. Well, if you don't know what that means and you don't understand those intervals, that doesn't mean much to you. But if I know, oh, my third, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I got just played a Dorian scale by just knowing that. So it's not even about understanding and learning all these shapes, although you'll eventually learn all those shapes, but understanding what's happening with the intervals is a huge step to basically gaining some knowledge on guitar, right? So for you intermediate players, learning your major scale shape and then seeing and visualizing those intervals, so that's your minor 7, that's your 7, that's your octave, that's your 9, that's your third, that's your fourth, that's your minor third, that's your fifth, that's your flat 5. Just seeing those shapes, it helps when you're communicating with other musicians. It helps if you're reading something and they're talking about a scale that's got a flat 5 in it. You understand where that is and what's going, and you also start to get that in your ear. Even if you mostly play by ear, you should hear this. You should be able to hear that that's that flat 5 note, because that's in our blues scale. Right? So that's something that I think is important to see, because then it leads to hearing it, right? We all learn differently. We all have our own little ways of going about learning. Some things work better for some people. Like some people are visual learners, very visual learners, right? And so looking down and seeing shapes will make the most sense. Other people are auditory learners. So for them, basically hearing, that probably is easier to cement that in your brain when you can hear it, right? Other people are more kinesthetic learners. So for them, feeling that shape, that's my major 7. That feels right when I do that with my pinky to there. So any place I play, that feeling of those fingers, it's more tactile, more of a tactile learner. So the problem I see with a lot of instructors is that basically they teach everybody like they're the same student, and that's just not the case, right? So you got to find out as the student what works best for you. Are you going to see things better? Do you need to hear them? Do you want to feel them? Is it some combination? So play around with all that stuff, experiment, because that totally makes you a much more knowledgeable player. So not only does that help you play the things you already know better, but when you learn new things, it's not so foreign, it's not like, oh my gosh, this is really hard, right? So that's what I would say. There's a lot of different ways to go about this. So that's the one thing with theory and learning all these different shapes and patterns. You should experiment with as many as you can, right? Because in spite of what you'll see on some, YouTube videos where there's only one shape, the pros know, right? I can guarantee you there's not just one shape the pros know that you don't know. There are a lot of different shapes that we all know, and so learn as many of them as you can. So Nathan, I think Nathan had something he was going to chat about. So do that, Nathan. We'll see if we got any other questions rolling in. And,
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. So, yeah, we're super excited to be here today for office hours. And for all of you folks that are interested in getting the Street Theory for Guitarist course, you can do so now on TrueFire. And if you use promo code office hours, you'll get 20 bucks off, which is great. So go there now, get Street Theory for Guitarists. And the cool part about this, Jeff, is if they go and they buy the course, it automatically will help you out as an educator and as a musician. You'll get a cut. I know, right? Isn't that crazy?
I hope so. Sometimes that happens.
Sometimes that happens.
Absolutely.
So
thank you, Nathan.
Of course, yeah. Right now, head over to TrueFire and get this course. It's amazing. I love watching it. I'm learning how to play guitar myself, and watching your courses is what's helping me get ahead.
That's awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, there's a lot of content there. There's like 5.5 hours, I think, worth of stuff in there. So a lot of different things. And once again, the way I look at theory is this is like kind of practical, bite-sized chunks of information that you're really going to use, right? Things that you'll actually use when you're playing. So I think that's, for me, the biggest thing is stuff that's useful, because I always thought playing for years, theory was like kind of a weird thing, but honestly, it was just, I was already doing it and I just didn't really put two and two together. So I think that's part of the excitement of it. But understanding intervals, I'm telling you, will be a big step towards being able to learn your guitar much better. And you can start here. Once again, as we talked about, a major scale can be played all over the place, in different places. I can play that major scale everywhere, and those intervals will be the same. So if I play this here, and that's my 5, guess what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my 5. So it's a good way to transfer things around the neck as well. And as I said, you don't have to think as much about what the notes are, because the intervals are the same. So in other words, if that's my 5 in G, if I play off of this E note and I play that, that's my 5 shape, right? I don't even have to know what this note is. I know that's my 5th from E, right? So it's a big help when you sort of have that down, to not worry about, what key am I in? How am I going to find this? So a couple things when we're talking about intervals that I do want to touch on, because I get asked this a lot, and I know this is sometimes a confusing thing when people are starting out, even, and for sure as they're intermediate players, and understanding chords and why chords are the way they are. So every chord that's out there in the world has a blueprint or a formula for how it's built, right? So in other words, we would say, where does those notes come from? Well, it comes from the master blueprint that's kept in the vault in the land of Oz behind the curtain, right? So if you've got access to that blueprint of here's how to build a chord, and your intervals, you can build any chord. You don't have to have somebody say, you don't have to pull out an app and say, here's the shape. You can just go, all right, let's play a major 7th chord. Okay. We don't know how to do that. We have no idea what that is. How would I know that? Well, I got to check the blueprint. Major seventh chord is built from the first, third, fifth, and seventh of your major scale. So now we go to our A major scale, which is go to A and play my major scale shape. So I'm going to want to play the first note, the third note, 4, 5, the fifth note, 6, 7. So my first, third, fifth, and seventh. I want to play those notes together, and that's going to give me an A major seventh chord. So you can figure out how to play those wherever, right? I can play one there, I can play that there, I can play the 5 there, and I can play the third there. There's my A major seventh chord. So even if you've never played that chord in your life, if you understand the blueprint and you can basically find the intervals, you can find that chord. All right. So this is something I think is important for players to think about when you're playing all these different chord changes. If you look down and see that, there it is. So what if we said, what is a dominant seventh chord? Well, the difference is we need 1, 3, 5 and flat 7, right? Or we call it a minor 7. We flat the 7. We take it down a half a step. So here's the good news. If you know your intervals and we're playing this major 7 chord, and I can see that's my 7th interval, my 7, flat it down to there. All right, now just go there. That's a dominant 7 chord. So once again, I don't have to learn a whole new shape. I just learn how to vary this shape. All right, that's the big takeaway here. Don't worry about learning a whole new, oh my gosh, I got to learn a whole new chord, form that I don't know. Just start with one and then learn how to change it up, right? If I take the third down, I get a minor 7, right? If I add a 9 on top of that, it's a minor 9. If I drop the 7 down to 6, it's a minor 6. So all of those different chords aren't as scary and weird as you might think. They're just variations. And if I'm looking down and I'm seeing my patterns on the neck, it's pretty easy to do. So the blueprint or what's being called for, right, in the chord. I need these notes, these intervals, and then you look at where those intervals are, and there you've got them. So let me know if that makes sense, if that sort of is enlightening, and the fact that it shows you that chords aren't as mysterious as you may have thought, but basically that you would be able to find them around. So I've got one question coming in here, basically asking about how do you know which octave to play of those notes? So in other words, if we've got the 1, 3, 5, and 7, can I play, as I played this chord, I played the 5 up here as an octave instead of down here, right? Now I could have played it down there. Why wouldn't we play it down? So that's 1, 5, 7, 3, right? That's kind of dark down there, right? Playing the 5 down there. So if I displace that 5 and put it up an octave here, same note, right? It's E note, same note. Now I play that up there, it's going to sound like this. So just sounds a little bit brighter than exact same chord would work both ways, right? Same exact chord. So which one would you play? Depends upon which one you like the sound of, right? Most of the time I'm going to like this one better than this one. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, that one is better. It's definitely not right. It is pretty much the way I hear it and what I want to hear, which is why, I guess why you would want to know as many different places to play those notes in our octaves we talked about, right? I want to know all the different places to play those notes so I can choose which ones to play, right? I can choose, do I want to play that note down there? Or do I want to play it up there? Do I want to play this one there? Or would I like to play that octave up to there? So what if I did that and I played that note? This gets a little squirrely when I do it like this, but I can do it like this. Same thing, same chord. I just moved my seventh up to there. So there's a lot of different ways to approach that kind of thinking, right? When we're playing chords like that. And understanding those chords leads to being able to play a scale over the top of that or a solo over the top of that. I want to know what I can play over the top of that by understanding where those notes are, what the intervals are, right? So you got another question? I'm just answering a couple questions here while we're rolling. If you have any others, shout out. We can kind of go any direction you want to go with, hopefully not getting too weird, but I'm up for weird. That's fine. Sort of a nerd that way. The question is, could I recommend a book to learn basic music theory before you start a course? That's possible to understand more quickly. So, man, there are a lot of good books. If you're a book learner instead of like a course, it depends upon what you want to do, right? So street theory, my thinking on theory is a little bit different than the way theory is usually taught. Like if you start out, oftentimes there's reading music involved, right? So if you're reading, doing a reading study, just from like the basic Hal Leonard book 1 kind of a thing. I learned to read starting out with that and then doing the Berkeley method books. Great for understanding notes, chord reading. But as far as other theory stuff, man, I don't think that you would need to do a book before you do a course, right? The basic concepts of theory are pretty much the same no matter what you're doing. And as I said before, you're learning theory. Even if you looked at TrueFire Learn Guitar 1, right? We talk about theory. We're learning how to put together a G chord with a C chord, with a D chord. So I think those subjects, while we don't necessarily always call them theory, they're theory, right? They're definitely theory. So that's the cool thing about it. We got another question. Okay, good question. So when you are moving, right? So we go from a major 7 to a dominant 7. We have to change a note. So, man, I will say that is to me still a matter of looking down and seeing where those notes are, right? If I have to play this major 7, the D, D major 7. Something cutting out here. A D major 7. If I'm looking from here, I know that's my 7. So seeing that, I know that's got to drop down to there, right? So I just can drop that down. It's because I visualize those notes is what helps me learn that faster. Now, when you're first starting out visualizing these, is it fast? No, probably not, right? And that's cool. But the longer you do it and the more you start to see, if I played this note and I want to add the 9 in there, it's right here, and I want to go to a dominant 7. I got to go down here to my 7. So I know my dominant 7 is here, and I want to add a 13. I go to there. I want to get rid of the 5 and go here. So I'm seeing all those moves as I'm doing it. So while that seems difficult, it starts with the basic. From here to here's a 5th. From here to here's a 3rd, right? I want to do a minor 3rd. Boom, you hear that, right? You can tell that's major, minor. So you start to see those. Every time you play this note, this is from the major 3rd to the minor 3rd. It'll always be that way, right? Things get funky between the 3rd and 2nd string because of the way the guitar's tuned, but otherwise you can play that anywhere. I could play it here. Here's a major 3rd from this note. Here's a minor 3rd. Thinking of this as my root note, right? So we can always do that. Here, major 3rd to minor 3rd, major 3rd to minor 3rd, right? It's always going to be that way. So that's kind of, I guess that's how I'm thinking about that. All All right, we've got more questions coming in. We'll go over a couple more questions. I know we're going to eventually run out of time here, but shoot questions if you want. I want to make sure you guys get anything answered that you have. So Nick says, how about mixing triads? So triads, right? So there's a couple things that I would suggest you do with triads. You can do this if you're, not an absolute beginner, but late beginner, intermediate, late intermediate players. Triad's a 3-note chord, right? So let's start with our major triad. Once again, how would we find that? What is a triad? 3-note chord, 1, 3, 5. Your first note, your third note, and your fifth note. So we take our G major scale, first note, third note, fifth note, 1, 3, 5, right? So G, B, D. So we could play those anywhere together, and it's a G major triad, right? I can play a G and let's do something squirrely, and a B and a D, right? So that's a G major triad. That's not very handy to play, right? So we'll play it a little more sensible. And let's do it in order, right? So G as our low note, the B is our third, the D is a 5. G, B, D. We'll do it right there. G, B, D. So that's what we would call the root inversion. That's the basic triad. That's a 3-note chord. That's my G chord, right? So what I would recommend you do with that is play those same 3 notes going up, and then basically play the inversions. When we talk about an inversion, we're just going to rearrange the order of the notes of the chord, right? We said the G is on the low note, then it's B, then D. We invert that. We're going to take the G from the bottom and put it on top. Now it's going to be the B on the bottom and the D and then the G. So I can do it right here, but let's stay on those 3 strings and do it up here. So that's pretty cool, right? And then we could go up to the next note, which was the D. So we're going to invert it one more time, take the B from the bottom, put it on top. Now we've got the D on the bottom, D, G, B. So check this out. All of those are a G major triad. They're just different inversions. The root inversion, the first inversion of the chord, and then the second inversion of the chord. So why would I do that? Why would I need to know that? Well, a lot of reasons, right? Why do I want to know those 3 different places to play that? Number one, they sound different, right? So we got a G, my bass player's doing, I could go, or I could go, or I could go, or I could go. And that's just playing G. So if the music says play G for 4 beats, right? Or I could go. And it's like way more interesting, right? Very cool. So there's a lot of reasons to play triads, a lot of cool things, but that particular use of a triad is super helpful. The other thing is if I'm playing, I'm playing a lick, and I want to play the chord. If the only G chord I know is here, I got to go, but if I know this pattern right here, or I could go, or I could play that scale down there. I could tie it together. In other words, that chord is more handy for me to play. It's closer, right? Easier access. So that would be a super brief intro. I do cover triads in the course in a little bit more detail, but that's the idea of a triad. Last thing on triads, because, I'm a nerd and that's the way it is. What do we know about blueprint that we pulled out of here for a major chord is 1, 3, 5. A minor chord is 1 flat 3 or minor third and 5. So if we know our interval shapes, flat the third, well, here we go. 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5. There's my minor triad. Up here, I put the third on the bottom. Now I flat that. Up here, the third's on the top. Now we've got the minor shape of here. Same thing. I want to play this, anyway, you can find your way around those triads, and triads in each set of 3 strings, like I said, are super helpful to know. Very helpful to be able to play through the different patterns of it, right? If you can do these, it just gives you so much more control over where you're playing chords and moving around the neck, and helps you move up and down the neck this way. So a lot of cool things on triads you can do. Oh, yep. Man, there's a lot of great questions coming in, so I'm going to blaze through some of them. Nady Night, having trouble keeping up with the chords on the beginning courses, beginners, right? Should you stay there, or you should carry on to other lessons? So look, don't worry too much about getting everything perfect when you're starting, right? Sometimes this is contradictory to what other people say, right? But if you've got a chord progression and you're playing like this, right? But if you're like, and you stop and you try, I got to get it right. Okay, I got it. Then this one, if you spend all your time doing that, number one, you get frustrated. Number two, you don't get in the groove of things. I would rather hear you go. And have it be a little hairy in there, a little ugly, but you're still moving on, right? And then you stop and you go, all right, let's work on those chords one at a time, right? So a good tip is work on that chord one at a time. Just get that chord down. Take your fingers off, right to that G chord, then right to that. But don't feel like you have to have everything perfect before you move on. That's what I would suggest. Don't feel like that, because you'll never get anywhere. Perfection is the enemy of good, or something like that, I think. You're welcome, Nick. So HH is asking, are these the passing notes like Hendrix used? Yeah. So Hendrix did a lot of things, but the way I think of Hendrix kind of stuff is indeed some of these, basically these triad shapes in combination with a scale lick and a cage system, right? Like that, right? I'm playing the G chord, and that's the E of my caged, and I know this scale goes with it. So I can play anything. And then I can go up to the major scale. Noodling around like that stuff. But that's sort of a combination of understanding the triads and how they work in there, the caged chords, and then the scales that go with the cage system. So this goes back to what I said when I started, right? It's all connected. There is no one thing. Just learn caged and you're done and you're good to go. Or just learn how to play your major scale patterns and that's all you need. It's all connected. So when you look down at it and you've went through everything and you understand everything, then you start to just see it as all one, right? I don't necessarily break up caged thinking from arpeggio thinking. It's all sort of the same thing. Hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully that sort of answers your question. That was the briefest Hendrix lesson. Sorry, Jimmy. Touch on arpeggios. So Davey says, touch on arpeggios. So for those that you may not know, An arpeggio is just the notes of a chord played one at a time, right? So check this out, right? So we play a G major bar chord, and I play those notes one at a time. That's a G major arpeggio. Not always the sexiest thing to play it right there. So we learn other places, right? That's a G major arpeggio. So little cooler things. Maybe there's cooler things I can do there. But here is, once again, the connective tissue, connecting it right back to triads, because triads are what? They're a 3-note chord. So what was that? That was a G major arpeggio. So that was G major arpeggio, playing those same triads we played just a minute ago as kind of chords. That's playing them as arpeggios, right? So understanding arpeggios all over the neck is super important, and it ties things together. Arpeggios can make your playing much more melodic, right? If I'm playing, gosh, let me see. If I was going to play like a bluesy turnaround, like that, I could just kind of noodle through it, right? And go, right, and noodle away. But what if I played arpeggios over there? All of a sudden, that sounds pretty cool then, right? If I had some lines like that, and just improvising those lines, but just using an arpeggio, right? Those type of feeling, that starts to sound pretty cool. Sorry, I had to end that. Drive me crazy all night. So arpeggios are the notes of a chord played one at a time. We find those anywhere within our scale shapes, within our chord shapes. So it's really a matter of extracting them or pulling them out and going, oh, I see an arpeggio here, because they're all over the place, right? If we think of a G major arpeggio, it can be as simple as this, or as complicated as, those goofy things. So we can do that kind of crazy stuff. But an arpeggio, those are arpeggios, right? It sounds like just a lead line, but it's the notes from a G major chord, from an A minor chord. So then I do the same thing, and I think more, and do them as chords, but it's the same shape, which is pretty cool, right? So that's a couple of thoughts on arpeggios. This is like the quick hit nuggets of stuff. This is even short. I mean, my street theory, the idea of street theory is to give you theoretical theory concepts, and basically do it in a pretty easy, usable way. So this is an even condensed version of that, right? Nathan's chiming in and telling me, hey, we're going to have to go. But let me just... So, Durf, that's a question Nathan's never going to let me get into answering all that.
He could go all night with that one, Jeff, I'm sure.
I'm feeling the big old hook going across my neck. I know we're wrapping this up. So here's the thing, guys. Playing leads, soloing is huge. So what I'll say when we're talking about soloing, is it too is related to all of this, right? If I want to play a melodic solo, I want to be thinking about, in my mind, I think about scale shapes, but I also think about the chord tones that I'm playing over, right? The issue I see a lot of times with players is they just noodle away over whatever, right? This is an A, so I'm just going to, just noodle away over that, right? And that sort of works. That's the danger of it, right? Is that it basically, it feels pretty good and it sounds like it works. But man, when you do things where you're connecting those chords and riffs with the scale notes, that's when you get, like I did before, simple stuff like that. But the licks sound way more melodic, right? It sounds way more interesting because the notes I'm playing are paying attention to the chords, right? So jazz guys and country guys, they start out soloing more thinking about playing over specific chords. Rock guys and blues guys, unfortunately, usually don't. Usually they start out in the noodling method and say, oh, we're in A minor, I'm going to shred in my Aeolian scale. And you get a, and it's like, that's cool, but it's not really addressing when the chords change to something different. Whereas if you're thinking about that chord change, it makes it, to me, more interesting and more melodic. It's like playing blues, right? If you're playing blues and you're playing over this dominant 7 chord, and you're just solo, and we go this chord, and you just keep soloing, it's like, that's missing out on this. Right? All of a sudden you hear the chord changes, even though I'm just soloing. So it's like, that is a better way to solo. So now you put that, I don't have my rhythm guitar player here, but if I had the rhythm player, all of a sudden then doing that same thing, it sounds like we're in sync together, right? So with soloing, man, so much of it is dependent on listening to what is happening with the chords. So that's my quick soloing tip. That probably didn't exactly, answer your question, Dirk, but that's a good starting point. So guys, thank you so much for this. Good stuff. We're going to be doing more of these things, whether it's with me or with other artists, and Nathan has done a couple already, but we've got a lot more live stuff coming on we're going to be doing. So appreciate everybody sticking around. You can always shout out to me if you've got questions after the fact. I'm available at TrueFire. I do some one-on-one online lessons as well at TrueFire. So go there and you can find me there, and you can always shoot me a message and check out the Street Theory course. And this, I think you can watch this again. This will probably be posted eventually in our live thing. Thank you, Lyle. Good to see you, brother. In our live thing, we'll be able to, watch us again and again if it was that entertaining.
This will be available for replays directly after this airs. So we appreciate you guys being here. And if there's certain office hours that you would like to see, feel free to let us know, and maybe see what we can do, tailoring it to some more specific. I know Jeff likes to get into the nitty gritty, which we absolutely love. So the more.
Yeah, absolutely. We have so many great artists at TrueFire, and working with all those artists over the years, man, they all have really something to offer, and that's something cool. And we can do something else here too. I'm happy to do other things. We could talk about that cool guitar right there. Yeah, we can talk about all kinds of interesting stuff. So let us know. But thank you guys so much for being here. Appreciate your support as always.
Thanks, everybody.